So Andrew, let's talk about software development, the process. And obviously, Startup Portal is building a platform, right? So you can use me as the example, but the process, and our process started last year. So it's not instant pudding.
That's correct. So the software development process is very much like building a custom home. And there are some specific steps that you want to take as you go through that. I always say to start with a vision. So just as with a custom home, you're going to start with how big a house you want, how many bedrooms, how many bathrooms, kind of a broad vision. What style? Cape Cod, Rancher, whatever it may be. It's the same with software. So normally software is built for one of two reasons. It's either to make money or to save money in most cases. And there's always usually a business driver for why you're going to do that. And when you go down that path of saying, hey, we couldn't find anything on the market, so we need to construct something unique to us, the very first thing is, okay, what does it, at a high level, what does it look like? What do we need to solve from a problem standpoint? And you're going to craft that into sort of a summary statement typically of this is what we need to create and this is the problem we need to solve. Once you've gotten through that, you're going to engage and you go through your features, the most important things that you need. You're going to typically engage an analyst or consultant that knows this process well. And just like you would engage an architect to build a house or to draw your blueprints, it's the same in technology. You're going to engage an architect that happens to be a solution architect, typically, that's going to take the summary that you have and tease out of that all of the details that are necessary to build whatever phase one is going to be. So it starts with that process. The goal of that, which takes, as you know from your project, multiple revisions typically, but the goal of that is to document what's going to be built. And this is super important, not only just like a blueprint is necessary for a house, right? If you don't have a blueprint and you try to build a house, who knows what's going to happen, right? The bathroom might be on the wrong floor or upside down, who knows?
Plumbing on the outside.
Exactly. So once you have that document and you work toward building that spec, it provides the roadmap. It is the blueprint, the roadmap, and it's what then allows anyone that now has this document to hand it off to a dev team that has never heard any of the conversation, never seen any of the discussion. Just like with a custom home, when they hand off the blueprints to the contractor, contractor's never seen them before, but they can read the blueprints and they can perfectly construct that house. Same thing in the development cycle. So you're going to go through this process and it requires your team to really make some hard decisions. Most of the hard decisions are how much you can trim out of that to make the first build as lean and small as possible. The biggest mistake most people make when they go down the path of custom software is they try to over-engineer or overbuild it, and they'll try to fit every feature they could ever think of in there. That's a mistake. You want to do the opposite. In fact, once you've developed the spec, which might have every feature on the planet, you're going to cut that spec down to just what you need for phase one, which typically are the most important high-value points. And then if you do that, you'll keep timeline and budget under control, you'll get a delivery faster, and then you can get it into the hands of users that can actually begin to iterate and start to use it and tell you what they really want. Because as you know, once you get a first release, you go, holy cow, now that I see it on screen, we need this and we need that, and we want to change that.
It is truly a whole different perspective. And hopefully I've managed to just control myself and just get through the development piece, and basically we're going through the bug process now.
That's it.
And I have my list of to-dos or wants down the road, but it is a managed process, no doubt.
Absolutely. So back to the process, I mean, once you have the spec, the next thing that typically happens, it's going to go into the development cycle. So in our case, we build web and mobile applications. So when I say that and I say web applications, lots of people think website. Well, they are websites. They're just hyper smart websites with databases and integrations and all kinds of stuff behind them. So in our process, it's going to go into development. It might go to one or multiple developers depending on what technologies are required, what disciplines are required, database engineers to do the architecture of the data structure, all these kinds of things. That's what we call the black hole, right? Because that's the time when the client has been so interactive and we've been interacting up to the point where that happens. Now those guys have to go do the work. And that's the point where clients go, okay, I'm kind of waiting for this thing to come out.
I will say that your every other week meeting,
Yeah.
it helps, ease the pain of what's going on. So,
it.
and you get, the details and explain the process.
So, and to that point, for years we didn't do that. And it was just a very nervous portion of the process for the client, where we started to introduce that several years ago, and we begin to do that. So what we do is, as we did with you, we show progress as we're going along so that folks can see that this thing that's been in their brain for however long is starting to become real. Which is an important part. So development continues on until it's complete. As we get to certain milestones, we begin to initiate a quality assurance process where we have testing teams that go through the platform, verify that what's in the spec is what we're seeing on screen, verifies user experience issues, etc., identifies bugs. The one thing everyone who builds custom software has to realize is in 18 or 25 years or more I've been doing this, 18 with OPG, I've never seen a custom software platform be deployed without bugs.
Right.
It's just the nature of building something brand new. You catch as much as you can, but there are always going to be those types of things. Now, if you're working with a reputable firm, you're going to have a relatively small list, and what you're going to have are a few bugs and a lot of changes, which is, I think, what you're seeing in your experience. They may not be big changes, but tweaks and tunings,
Sure.
and things like that.
And that interaction of actually getting into the software and testing it and using it and seeing, oh, could we do it this way? Without changing the world, just
Right.
the minor modifications to get us up to launch.
Well, and some of your mods, I mean, just as a great example, they're very small effort-wise, but they'll save a collective of many, many hours just by small tweaks that help speed
Absolutely.
the entry of data. So even things like that pop up. But once we get through our internal QA, we'll create a release day for beta. It's what we call user acceptance testing. And that's when we hand it off to the client. And you are very familiar with that process. What we tend to do is we walk folks through at a high level. What we don't want to do is train them necessarily. And the reason for that is what we want is real honest user feedback.
What you're saying is, you don't give any instruction, you just say start using it. And that in itself is a good experience, but it it is something that you'd like to have a little cheat sheet or something, but it's all part of the process, and I
Well,
appreciate
you
it.
have a cheat sheet. It's called the spec, right? So we always want folks to refer back to that. But the reason for that is we want honest, real feedback from the users at the UAT level before it gets to a customer. And that's one of the best ways to do it, is to experience it just as your customer would. So once that happens, we go through the process you're in the middle of now, which is sort of change iteration until we get it tuned to the place where it's ready for real live usage. And then we schedule a production launch. And at that point, the platform you've been working with all this time, typically you're going to clear out some test data. We're going to make copies of the database, deploy to the production hosting environment, et cetera. And then it's launch day. And depending on who you're launching and what you're launching will change what steps happen there. But it becomes go live day. There are different strategies for that. Sometimes we'll do, if it's public facing, we'll do soft launches where you only invite a small group of people to use it, and then you roll out to a larger group. For internal platforms similar to yours, or at least this phase, typically that launch is a little more muted because we don't have existing customers to prepare for, things like that.
Yeah, your launch date and my launch date are different timeframes, which
Yes.
is I certainly appreciate. So that's very helpful to give a perspective of the development. I guess I have one question for you, which I always go back to. In today's world, you can Google anything, but you do have people listening to you and knowing you have staff behind you. There are people out there that are developing software. I want to say on the cheap, and throwing it out there. I mean, do you find yourself almost redoing what they're doing, or providing the advice that you just start over and do it right?
So about 45% of our work is what we call takeover work. That's work that was created or started by someone else, and for whatever reason, that relationship changed. We've seen it where developers will walk off the job, people are let go. There are any number of reasons. As much as we can, we want to try to salvage the investment made. And we're able to do that because we're pretty smart at figuring out which parts are useful and valuable and which aren't. In my career, there have been very few times where we've had to say, throw the whole thing out, this is a train wreck, let's start over.
Okay,
In
good.
most cases, there's at least something leverageable. The thing that we have to watch for is not even just the functionality, but a lot of times it's the approach and security model. Remember, a lot of these are web applications, which means they just sit out there on the internet waiting to be used, but they're also waiting to be abused by bad actors. So security is usually the reason that we end up having to toss it. Unless it, I mean, I think maybe once or twice in my career, it's been like, okay, we've opened it up. There is nothing salvageable. Got to go. You know.
So that really brings us back to, and I appreciate it now, but the specification sheet and laying that out. So really, if you're looking to develop a project internally, externally, you really have to sit down and walk through it with someone like yourself. And when the documentation comes back, just understand it, absorb it, and it'll make the process so much better.
Well, and I mean, I think the other thing that gets lost about the spec is that's also from a finance standpoint, that's how everyone controls the expectation and the scope. What will often happen in software relationships is the expectations of the client and the expectations of the developer are very different if it's not documented. And what ends up happening is developers are always going to try to build the leanest they can, right? Typically. And then the client's expectations are that this very simple application will start their car, it'll wash their clothes, it'll do everything possible.
Sure.
And that conflict leads to a bad place. That leads to failed software. That's why the stats are really profound. When folks try to sort of do it on the cheap, you actually end up taking more time and more money, not in every case, but in most, than if you do it the right way first. And when we're talking about these kinds of investments, whether it's a small web platform, it's still a big investment, you know, whatever the number is, because it has so much value to the organization. So when you extend timelines and things like that, there's a lot that's bad. So that's why everything we want to do, we want to start with documentation. Say, hey, do we all agree on this? We do. And then we go forward together. Now we're aligned as partners, and we look at our clients very much as partners. In fact, we look at ourselves as an embedded part of our clients, right? We're the tech team.
Absolutely.
As part of the client. But that way we're both aligned, we're heading in the right direction, we're all trying to achieve the same thing.
That's great advice, and certainly appreciate you laying it out there, especially for someone who's a novice coming in, thinking they want to do something. There's some aspects and processes that need to be put in place, and appreciate the advice.
Absolutely, absolutely. The one last thing I'll mention in the process is once we get through the live launch, healthy systems will tend to evolve. Now, that doesn't mean that they have to add huge new modules, but they do need to be supported, and they need to have security and maintenance patching done and things of this nature. So once you finally build that dream you've had for so long, at that point, it's time to make sure you have support. Most firms that will build software are going to offer you that support. It's a variety of models they use. But make sure you don't overlook support for the networking infrastructure and the hosting infrastructure. A lot of times people forget that piece, but it's really, really important. So once you get through the process, you want to make sure you're going to be supported moving forward. It's a question I always suggest that folks ask early on, like, hey, okay, you built it for us, are you going to help us maintain it? And if the answer is no, that's not always bad, as long as you're prepared for that and you have a firm ready to help you.
Right. Oh, fair enough. And I think I'm in good hands. So I appreciate
We'll
it.
make sure you're taken care of.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you.